Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media Productions. In the cymbals today, we are going one step further than last time. Now we're going to talk about lathing and hammering. What are they? Why are they? What do they do? Lathing and hammering working together define a huge portion of the way that a cymbal sounds and also the way it looks, maybe even more in terms of the look department, at least in my experience. You can have two cymbals that look exactly the same and actually sound dramatically different, just objectively, when you play them. Without getting too scientific about it, because I don't lathe or hammer cymbals myself, we're going to talk about generalities in terms of what you can expect when you're looking at lathing, what it means, how it happens, why it happens, and why some cymbals don't have it and other cymbals have a lot of it, of both. When you have a cymbal blank, you're dealing with a piece of metal that's basically been pressed flat when it was hot, but hasn't had any hammering or any lathing done to it at all. We have one here. We're going to hear it in this video. And then over the course of the life of the cymbal as you're getting it from that into the finished product, varying degrees of lathing and hammering and sometimes multiple rounds of both will occur by the cymbalsmith to get it to sound the way that it's supposed to sound. When you have manufactured cymbals in factory type situations, there is oftentimes like a certain kind of regimen, a certain style, a certain way that all of those things happen to create a specific model in a specific line that is within like certain bounds of sound, so that if you're ordering one online or if you're gonna get one because you know someone that has it, there's kind of like a margin in which it's gonna sound the same. No two are perfectly alike. That's some of the fun and some of the frustration of cymbals, and this portion of the process of building the cymbal out is where a lot of those variations come into play. Let's get all the way back to the beginning and talk about what a lathe is. Ordinarily, a lathe is a device where you have a piece of wood or metal or whatever material you're working with that's strung out straight and spun, and you use different kind of bits on a stick to remove material from this as it's spinning in front of you. Think about a drumstick or a table leg. Not all drumsticks are lathed anymore, but some still are. Basically anything that you can imagine as having come from like a round dowel or from like the cylinder kind of shape. Now a cymbal obviously is not that shape, it's a big flat thing. So when you're talking about lathing a cymbal, you're talking about modifying the lathe itself so that the cymbal's vertical and it's spinning around in a circle, and you're drawing the bit for the lathe across the cymbal from the center to the edge and removing metal that way, which is why you end up with sort of a spiral pattern a lot of time. And the amount of material that you take away really influences the behavior of the cymbal, because when you have a piece of metal directly out of the smelting process, it's not the same hardness all the way through. It's not the same molecular structure all the way through. It's not totally homogeneous. So a good cymbalsmith is going to understand how to work with a blank to get a sound that appears possible over the course of the production. And sometimes the sound you want is not possible with that blank, and other times it tells you exactly what it wants to do and just kind of leads you down the path. For, the vintage cymbal nerds out there, you know that like old Zildjian Ks from the 40s look different than the ones from the 50s and then the 60s and the intermediate stamps and the new stamps and all that stuff. The lathing is different on all of them. It's my understanding that that was just sort of what they were doing at the time. It wasn't to make them sound a certain way. It was just the tools that they had at hand and whoever was doing it that day. There weren't a lot of people in the factory, so it's a very personalized thing, and it's also why some of them are better than others. And you might find one that you like and play 10 that you don't, because it was very much a hands-on kind of thing. The effect that lathing can have on the cymbal is dramatic enough that a lot of cymbals will have visibly different lathing on the top and the bottom to achieve the ultimate sound of the cymbal. It can really affect stick definition. It can really affect the overall wobbliness and kind of just feel of the cymbal. And people who have talked to me about making cymbals in the past have expressed too that a lot of the time when they're working on cymbals that are pre-existing that the owner of the cymbal wants to have weight removed from, they'll only remove it from the bottom of the cymbal and never from the playing surface, because removing it from the playing surface will actually change how the cymbal feels, but removing it from the bottom has less of an effect on the playing experience of the top and the stick definition, and still gets the weight off. Now, the other side of this little pendulum is the hammering process. I've been talking to my friend Jesse Simpson about this. He's worked on a lot of the cymbals here. He's made some of the cymbals from scratch that we have here at the studio. He's a super good friend and full of knowledge about this stuff, because if it's possible to do with a cymbal, he's tried it, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But suffice it to say that hammering basically comes in two forms. There's the hammering where you make the overall profile of the cymbal, the overall kind of height and shape of the cymbal with a larger hammer, and then later on, you use increasingly smaller or intermittently smaller hammers to tune the cymbal into behaving the way that you want it to by distributing tension, hard spots, hammer spots all over the cymbal that makes it behave differently than if you weren't to do that. When you see a cymbal that is less visibly hammered and a cymbal that's more visibly hammered, it's fair to say that you're going to have a more sort of consonant and singular and homogeneous tone with less hammering, and you're going to have more going on in terms of dissonance and interaction, possibly trashiness, possibly more sort of like Chinese sounding things going on in the cymbal as the hammering amount increases. This isn't 100% true 100% of the time, which is what's interesting about cymbals to me. You can't look at one and know what it's going to sound like. You have to play it. You can even know where it's from, when it was made, have 100 pictures of it, and have a video file on YouTube of it. It's still not going to tell you what it's like to play that cymbal until you put a stick to it, and also until you put your choice of stick to it, because if that person uses a bolero and you use 2Bs, it's not going to sound the same, it's not going to feel the same, and any semantics you use to describe it are out the window. Now, this cymbal that we use in-house almost all the time is hammered. It was pressed into shape in the first place as basically a blank or a Sabian AA raw ride, which is, the shape of a cymbal with the bell in it and everything, but no hammering, no lathing. This has been hammered extensively, but not a lot of small hammering. It's mostly large hammering. You can't really see that it's had a lot of impact on it. It doesn't have that kind of cratery shape to it. And that's because of the cymbal that it was meant to be patterned after, which is an old Avidus Zildjian from the 40s, which similarly was not laden with obvious hammer marks. It had a shape to it. It had a certain sort of distribution of hammering that gave it the feel that it had. But this one, to do what it does, didn't need to have the pockmarks all over it and that kind of irregular hammering. This gets us a sort of beautiful, blendy kind of tone that's nice and crashable. It still, flops around a lot. It's fully lathed on both sides. But overall, it's kind of a clean sounding cymbal. It doesn't have a lot of trashiness. It doesn't have a lot of wildness in it. It just kind of blends nicely and fits in with all kinds of stuff. Now, just as lathing simply is removing metal from the cymbal, hammering simply is work hardening certain areas of the cymbal relative to other certain areas of the cymbal. This is interrupting the ease with which it resonates and causing overtones in different parts of the cymbal to interact in different ways, creating zones of different sounds, small zones, larger zones, etc., that really change the whole behavior of the cymbal, both in feel and the overall sound of it. Now this cymbal exhibits a lot more visible hammering to it. It's still not super trashy, it's still not the darkest cymbal that ever was. It's kind of, for me, like a nice balance between a jazz cymbal and a rock cymbal. I use it all the time. It used to be a Meinl Sand Ride, which that particular one that I found was a little one-dimensional and it was inexpensive, so I got it because I needed a rock ride. And this one has been lathed extensively, but not a ton of weight taken off of it. It's more about like the style of lathing. It's been lathed fully on both sides. If you've ever seen a sand ride, they're sandblasted on the top and partially lathed on the bottom. And then additionally, it's been hammered extensively on top of the hammering that was already there. So when you look at this cymbal, you can see remnants of a lot of hammering on the bottom. You can see remnants of places where there's still some kind of like foundry crust from the blank on it. And overall, it kind of does ride, crash, bell, all of that stuff, but at just like a slightly higher volume threshold than I would use for small room gigs. So it's kind of like my loud gig cymbal, but it's still a 20, so it fits in my little bag and gets around nicely. It's worth noting that when people look at old Ks and different kinds of Turkish cymbals and things like that, that there's an awful lot of hearing with your eyes when you look at them. And it's reasonable to think that, you know, by showing you a cymbal without playing it and talking about it, I could tell you what it's going to do. And depending on your experience, you might believe what I'm saying or you might not. But again, this is another one where when people play it after I tell them what it is, they're surprised. But the bottom line is, hammering has a specific effect, but it's not one effect. It has everything to do with the way it was hammered, how much, in what order, and what the person hammering it was trying to get the metal to do. If you're dealing with a cymbalsmith that is going for certain sounds and has a preference for the way the cymbals should sound, they are intellectually, actively thinking about that when they're hammering the cymbal, because they have an idea in their head that they're after, the same way that a guitar player puts a bunch of pedals together to try to make one sound. And lastly, this guy. It's going to be featured in a lot of videos. There's not a whole lot to say about it, except that this is what a cymbal looks like right after it's been pressed and then a bell mashed into it when the metal was still hot. Every cymbal that you've ever had was made from something like this. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room now here. Machine hammering versus hand hammering. The first thing I want to say is that one is not better than the other. They just elicit different results. And depending on the results that you need, one is better than the other for the situation that you're in. It's very, very specific to the instrument you're doing, the music that you're making, all of that stuff. If you're talking about machine hammering, you're talking about either someone is holding a cymbal and there's a hammer that's hitting it, and that's the machine that's hammering it, but the individual is choosing where it's hammering it rather than literally swinging a hammer. Or you're talking about a sort of CNC situation where there's a hammering program that the machine does to every cymbal that goes through it. The idea being consistency, the idea being that you can get through a lot of product quickly, and you can get your hammering done in the way that you want based on what worked on, say, like a prototype. On the other hand, hand hammering, like full-on hand hammering, is literally a person with a cymbal, an anvil, and hammers. And this is a situation where you're getting a little bit away from being entirely craft and getting some art into the craft that you're doing. And that is because when you're machine hammering something, there isn't really someone along the way that's hitting it a little, listening to it, making adjustments, hitting it a little, listening to it, making adjustments. I learned a while ago via an article about the Bosphorus factory that they would set cymbals aside for anywhere from hours to days before deciding that it was the final sound of the cymbal. Not from playing it even, but just literally like the metal has to settle. In situations where I've gotten hand-hammered cymbals where they had been worked on lately, they did sound different a day later, a week later, a month later. It's not just your ears getting used to it. It's not just you learning about the cymbal. It does change. And these are the type of situations where if you're after something that's really unique and after something that maybe is a little more cantankerous and a little more personalized to how you want to play versus just saying, that's a ride cymbal and that's what I'm going to do, one is not better than the other. They're just different things. There are areas in the industry where hand hammering has been turned into kind of like a deified concept where it's better or it's more expensive or it's boutique or whatever. I've played a lot of hand-hammered cymbals that were unplayable and terrible. I've played incredible cymbals that were straight out of the factory and still had the price tag on them. So this is not a catch-all for better or worse. And if you took beautiful hand-hammered cymbals and put them in a loud, heavy metal situation, they're not going to work. They're just not. And that's goes right the other way too, where like you can't necessarily take those beefy, bright cymbals that are for a specific purpose and then use them, for a cocktail gig. And that is okay. It's really important that people understand that that's okay. These are tools. They can be very personal, but they're tools for making music. They're not an end to themselves. Finding what works for you, that's a reasonable end to go after. And it could be literally anything. Some of the cymbals I've had for 20 years. Some of my favorites I've had for a year. Your preferences change, all that stuff. But the bottom line is, what works for you is what matters, and make sure you know what you're getting. All right, that wraps up this one. Again, lots of information kind of fast. I hope that was clear. If you have any questions, by all means, ask them. I'm being very careful not to talk too far outside of what I'm sure that I know. If I misstep, let me know. It's totally fine. This is really kind of nebulous stuff, and we're hoping in the end just to help you know what you're doing when you're talking about, looking for, playing, whatever, cymbals. And so much of this is conjecture, so much of this is opinion and things like that when people talk about them. And this is super fun. Thank you so much for watching, sticking with us, all that stuff, and we're going to keep it going.